Good morning, Scott.
Hi, Elaine. Good morning.
How are you?
Doing pretty good, thanks. Excited it's Friday. I think we're going to have some okay
Yes.
weather, so yeah.
It's supposed to clear up a little bit out there.
Yeah, I think so. It's good to see things are kind of, I think it's light at the end of the tunnel with this whole epidemic that we're dealing with, so
Yes. Yes.
that's what we're hoping.
I hope so too. I want to welcome everyone to 10 Minutes with 52. My name is Elaine Sheh. I'm the Community Engagement Manager. Today's guest is Scott Olsen. He is the founder of the Olsen Group, which helps people transform lives and find more fulfillment in the work that they do. I'm particularly excited about this session because I know that you help train sales professionals and other organizations in kind of positioning themselves and selling themselves. And in this time, I think people are kind of reinventing themselves and selling themselves to employers, maybe career pivoting. So I think there's a lot of elements of what you do that will be really helpful professionally and personally to our audience. So welcome to 10 Minutes with 52, Scott, and we're so excited to have you.
Thanks, Elaine. I'm excited to be with you and the folks online here. This is a topic that I think is really relevant today and always, but especially during this time, and it's really about managing change and transitions. And I'm in the business of helping people kind of transform their lives, how they operate, find more fulfillment in the work they do, using their gifts and skills in a more effective way. And understanding change and transitions just by itself is very, very helpful for me. I hope it's helpful for the audience today as well. And I want to share some concepts, kind of three main concepts today that I think will help. The first one is really understanding the difference between change and transition. And this idea comes from William Bridges, who wrote a classic called Transitions. And change we consider really the physical change that takes place, and the transition is more the psychological. For example, we have a 15-year-old daughter, and when she was little, this still applies today, but in different ways, but when she was little, the goal was to get her into the bathtub, and that was very, very difficult. But once we got her into the bathtub, it was very, very difficult to get her out. So the change wasn't the hard part. It was just this psychological transition to make the change and so forth. So we can think of it in those terms. I think that's helpful. Another concept kind of building on this that comes from William Bridges is the idea that things that can help with transitions is to have a ritual tied to it. For example, a wedding for people that get married. I read the other day that there was a couple that it's difficult to have a wedding today, obviously, so they're just going to use that money towards a house, and that's great, but they're missing out on that ritual, that symbolic event, which can really help through this transition in their lives. So there's graduations, there's birthday parties, obviously, there's New Year's, there's things that we do, and some of that's been lost over the years, and so thinking that through can be helpful through a transition. Building on this also is the idea, if you want to have a good beginning, you also want to have a good ending. When I work with individuals that want to move on to a new organization or into a new role, the first area we focus on is how can you make the most of what you're doing today and make sure you leave on a high note. And so you leave on a good note, and that often really helps with that transition. So the first concept is around change versus transition, that psychological element. The second concept is around understanding with change comes loss. And so it can be very, very helpful to understand the loss cycle. And one easy way, the easiest way that I know, is by remembering the acronym SARA, S-A-R-A. S stands for shock. There's often a, wow, is this really happening? What happened? I'm in shock. Then the A is for anger. There's who did this? How did this happen? And then the R is around rejection. It's almost like we wake up the next day, I know with this, is this really happening? No, this can't be happening. And then finally, the A at the end is acceptance. And we may not spend a lot of time in each one, or we might. I know myself, I was in just shock and this anger and rejection and shock again. You can kind of bounce back and forth at the beginning of this epidemic. And what was interesting was we were preparing this workshop for one of our client organizations with the executive team and the top management, about 15 folks. And this was so helpful just going through this myself to recognize, wow, I'm really stuck here in this. And I need to really just, it doesn't mean I agree with, but I accept the change that's taken place here. And once we accept it, that the healing can begin and we can move forward, but not until that happens. So remembering that can be very, very helpful. The third concept I wanted to share, major concept, is around a change strategy. And sticking with the rule of threes, the three main strategies to consider is, first, endure. Is this a change that I must just endure? Nothing I can really do about it. Grin and bear it, in a sense. Why fight it? No reason to struggle. For example, getting older. It's just, it happens. The second is really managing change. So endure, or can I manage it? How can I make the most of this change? It reminds me of the Serenity Prayer, right? To accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So maybe I can't stop from getting older, but how can I manage this? How can I take care of myself? Sleep, healthy diet, exercise, things like that to kind of age gracefully, in a sense, so to manage it where possible. And the third option is leading change. And this is something we really need today, really, is leaders to help lead us, with new ideas, new technology. I was doing some research, and perhaps some of you have heard about this, but of the Fortune 500 companies, half of them were started during times of recession. So wow, that's pretty awesome. Some of the names, for example, recently, in the last recession, the major recession, WhatsApp, Venmo, Groupon, Instagram, Slack, these were all developed during this recession. And if you go throughout history, way back, Disney was a company that was started during a very, very challenging time as well. So some of those great things come from this. That's really leading change. How can I make change happen instead of just reacting or trying to make the most of it? So those were the three major concepts I wanted to share. And normally this is a day workshop, but in the 10 minutes it's kind of nice to get a snapshot of this. But thinking through the difference between a physical change and the psychological transition, and tied to that, is there a ritual or event that can help me make this transition? The third is around remembering the loss cycle, because with change does come loss, and to recognize where might we be in that process. Just by naming that can be helpful. And then the third is a change strategy. Is this a change I must endure, just grin and bear it? Why fight it? Or how can I manage it, making the most of it? And then the third is, where can I lead change? And on that last note, with organizations, obviously a new product, a new technology can help with that, a new idea. And the other piece too is to be proactive in your prospecting efforts, or getting out there, really introducing yourself. You can lead that effort versus just sitting back and waiting for things to happen or come to you. I heard early on in my career, I was asked, how many full-time recruiters does Harvard University have? I thought, do they need any? Are people dying to get in there? And I was told at the time, this was about 20 years ago, over 100 full-time recruiters. I thought, wow, why would they do that? Why would they invest in that? Because they don't want to sit on their hands. They don't want to wait back and wait for the best to come to them. They want to be proactive. And so I just want to leave you with that idea that leading change where you can helps you feel in more control. And we don't have total control over our lives, but where we do, we want to exercise that, and being proactive, putting yourself out there. A lot of the work we're doing today with organizations is being proactive with their outreach. There's a lot of uncertainty. These are challenging times, but the answer is still reaching out to new organizations, new people that you might be able to do work with and engage with. So I hope that helps, and thank you, Elaine, for allowing me to share with your audience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. I like the idea of, companies making progress and coming out of recession time periods, right, where they're building on things that we need. They're looking at the economy and looking at people, and hopefully some good will come out of the pandemic. I also really enjoy this idea of Sarah, right? The shock, the anger, the rejection and acceptance. I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are if someone gets hung up on any particular area. Is there any suggestions that you can make for people to kind of process change? You know, a lot of times, especially right now, these changes are being forced upon us for good reason, right? We're changing our lives for the betterment of the society around us. But a lot of times this change isn't something that we've opted in for. So given that there's this cycle of, you know, psychology and things, do you have any suggestions on how kind of we can process this and move to a better place as far as the change management cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the one is just taking a step back. For me personally, I had people telling me they'd never seen this side of me, how I was kind of responding initially, because I was really in shock. I was holding on to the past, trying to achieve past goals, and it was just, this is, you know, unprecedented. So I had to really accept the new world and so just taking that step back to recognize where might I be in this process, the shock, anger, rejection. And it doesn't mean you'll just sail through, but it did help. I'll tell you, the very next day, it made a difference. It allowed me to be more purposeful and more thoughtful. So just recognizing that. The other is thinking through, okay, where in this can I be proactive? Because if we're always reactive, that's very, very challenging space to be. And studies show that if you feel like you have no control and you just react to everything, it can be very depressing. So even within that, where can I be proactive? What can I do? What I have to kind of suffer and endure through? Where can I make the most of it? But what can I do proactively? There's a famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, written, actually it's right here, by Viktor Frankl during his time in the Nazi prison camps. And he's a famous psychologist, and he had created a therapy called Logotherapy. And the idea was that at the end of the day, you can still control your thoughts and your attitude towards things, and try to find meaning in everything. And so take what meaning can come out of this, and it might take some extra work, but really recognizing, okay, I have to do this, but these are some things I can do proactively. And I think that makes people feel more in control of their lives.
Very quickly, just the flip side, I'm curious. So for those people who want change, who want to push change in their lives, whether personally or professionally, how would you suggest someone kind of approach that? Do they start to make lists? Do they start to look at their end goals? What do you think is kind of the most efficient process to kind of get to where they want to get to?
Yeah, it's one of the exercises we go through is to do a lifeline. You go back throughout your life, and I'm born here, and here's today, and then you map highlights and lowlights. And then we take a step back, we look at that, and we think, okay, what are some of the patterns here? And really moving forward now, what do I want to do more of, and what do I want to do less of? So that can be a very helpful exercise, and you may not be aware of, wow, all the highlights have this similar theme. You know, maybe I was traveling, or it's all about these type of people, or, you know, there may be some lowlights that you can't avoid, but how can you minimize those? So that can be a nice exercise to kind of think through how can I be more proactive versus, hey, these things kind of happened, but how can I produce these more looking forward?
Awesome.
Yeah, and just one last comment on goal setting too. Most people don't set goals, we find, because they'd rather come home each day and say, you'll never guess what happened to me today. So just the idea of setting a goal says to yourself and the world that I do have some influence over the future. Not total control, but some influence. So that's a very powerful part of it too. Yes,
I totally agree. Thank you so much, Scott, for taking the time to chat with us. And thank you to everyone that joined us for 10 Minutes with 52. Be proactive, really think about all of the things and be able to process that change, whether you want it or not. Change is happening. So thank you so much for guiding us through and talking to us about it. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks, Lane. Really enjoyed it and loved your summary there. That was perfect.
Thank you. Bye.